Hi, my name is Bianca Hughes, and I'm Associate Professional Counselor at the Jordan Stones Counseling Center in Roswell, Georgia. I'm under the direction of Mandi Peek and also under the supervision of Mandi Peek and Dr. Keny Felix. So today I really wanted to talk to you about the work that I do. I primarily work with women who are struggling with perfectionism and beating themselves up. Therapy with me helps them move out of the shadows and into the purpose. And if you will notice on my website, one of the things I do have is about discovering your unique purpose. And so, one of the things, the reason why I chose that is that with perfectionism, there tends to be a huge focus on what am I not doing, what am I not doing enough of, what I don't have, and less of a focus of what I am doing right and what I do have. And so, with the whole title of Discovering Your Unique Purpose, it's kind of like getting to rediscover who you are, or discovering who you are, or discovering new parts of who you are. Whereas before you may have not seen it because you've been really focused on perfectionism or trying to be perfect. So just so we're clear on just a few things, I just really want to talk a bit more about the perfectionism side of it. And if you see me looking down, I'm just looking at my notes. Of course, I'm not perfect. So the definition of perfectionism, and the one of the I just want to point out, I use perfectionism versus perfectionist because I don't like to label, and for me perfectionist is a label. With perfectionism, it's a more of a belief system versus a perfectionist. That's who you are, and it's a bit more rigid. So with perfectionism, it's more tend to be a belief system and a way of thinking, a way of viewing things. And so that can happen on a continuum. It can really be really strong in one area or really loose in another. It may be happen in one area, but in not one area of your life. So I just like to give it some form of flexibility because there's already rigidness in perfectionism. So I like the definition of Brene Brown. Her states, perfectionism is a self-destructive and addictive belief system that fuels this primary thought. If I look perfect, live perfectly, and do everything perfectly, I can avoid or minimize the painful feelings of shame, judgment, and blame. So that's just to get you that understanding and noticing, of course, the words of shame and trying to be okay on the outside, but we're not okay on the inside. Another big thing there, I do like to add, personally, just another thought that I also like to add onto that is that perfectionism is the belief. If I am perfect, then I will be loved and never rejected. And so, with the rejection, there's a huge thing with perfectionism that if your life is perfect, everything's all together, you act like it's all together and everything's right, and you don't make any mistakes, I won't be rejected. I won't feel that pain. I won't feel lonely. I won't feel experience shame, which is very huge, which you just mentioned. And again, just to say, shame means meaning guilt is what I did is wrong, what I did was bad, I made a mistake, versus shame is I am the mistake. And so what happens is with perfectionism, it's interpreted as your mistakes are part of who you are and part of your being. And that means that now because you made a mistake, you are a mistake. And so what happens with that is in order to avoid mistakes, you try to make everything perfect. And if you do make a mistake, you can be very defensive because you want to avoid the rejection. So one of the things that I do like to share, just in relation to that whole rejection piece, and I just like to say this: perfectionism doesn't allow you to recognize you are loved and accepted right where you are. And so that's why I enjoy doing that work, is allowing people to see what they do have, allowing people to see the treasure and know the treasure that they are, to help people to understand there are people around you and people in your life that love you and accept you where you are. And point being, people already know you're not perfect and they're with you and they're spending time with you and they want to be with you, but it's very hard when you get stuck into that thought basis of perfectionism, to understand that. And I love to do this work because it's trying to get to the root of those issues. Where did you first hear, or where were you first rejected and it was really painful? And often people don't want to experience that again, and so they try to cover things up. And that's why I really like to delve into that. Another thing is just exposing the shame. I love to do this work, exposing shame. A lot person who talks about that a lot is a Brene Brown, and it's very true. If we talk about what we're having a hard time with, and that's exposing the shame rather than hiding it and saying I feel really bad, then we can work on it. But if we leave it hidden, there's no work that we can do. And I really like to see that and help my clients just really be set free, and just develop that vulnerability, and just people to see the strength and the courage that they already do possess that they don't even realize. So that's it's very, very powerful, very powerful thing. And it does take time. You don't just sit here and be like, okay, well, now I told you everything that's wrong with me and I should be okay. It is really a process to get to some of those deep rooted stuff that you probably may not have thought have happened in perfectionism, with perfectionism, should I say. Um, and really getting that person to getting you to just focus on what do you have, and what are your gifts, and what are your talents, and what are you happy with, and how can you develop some self-acceptance. Self-acceptance is huge, and that means accepting where you are right now with everything you have, regardless of trying to make any improvements, because there's such a huge focus in perfectionism, to focus on the goal, to focus on the next thing. And then what happens is we get to that next goal and the next thing, and we still don't feel okay. So it's a continuous cycle. So it's helping you understand, like, well, let's focus on what you have now. And I'm not saying that perfectionism is totally bad. There's a lot of great characteristics because it could develop excellence. And just understand that it's not the person that deals with perfectionism that's bad. It's just the belief system. The belief system is that if I'm perfect, if I get all these things right, then I won't be rejected and I won't feel shame. And that's not 100% true. So I just want to kind of add that. And some people might say, well, how do I know? How do I know this is something I deal with? How do I know this? You may have heard people say something like, you always like to be right. You might find that you're very critical of others, or you're very critical of yourself. Even when you do something that's really good, you find fault in it. And that fault that you're finding is the fact that what you did wasn't 100% perfect. For example, and it's very black and white, so it's either got to be right or wrong, black, white. It's all or nothing. You don't like to deal with those gray areas because the gray areas are uncomfortable. And that's one of the things I do work on a lot, helping you be uncomfortable in those gray areas, because that's where you grow, and that's where you develop. And one of the things I always say, you have to get uncomfortable to get comfortable. Another part, just want to add on this, is that with the black and white thinking, for example, if a relationship ends badly, you may think, well, that whole relationship was bad. You may have been in a relationship for 2 years, it ended badly, therefore now that's a bad relationship. Well, what actually happened was, it was just the ending of the relationship was bad, but generally you had a really good relationship. I made a mistake. That's another huge one. I made a mistake, so now I'm a failure. Versus, well, I made a mistake, and what can I learn from this? And making those separations between what you do and who you are. Someone didn't like my work, so that means that my work is not good enough. And, we're leaving our sense of approval and our sense of worth in the hands of somebody else and making that decision. And so I do work a lot around the self-acceptance piece, as I mentioned, exposing the shame, and then self-compassion. I love this, and that's being able to, because you're often beating yourself up. Something's always never good enough. And so with the self-compassion, it's just recognizing when you're beating yourself up, and just recognizing you're having a really hard time. For example, if I see someone on the street hurting, my friend who's hurting, and I say, hey, it'd be okay. You'll get through this. And it's exactly the same thing, telling yourself, I'll be okay. I'll get through this. But with perfectionism, it doesn't allow you to do that, because you believe that you have to be perfect and something is wrong with you. because you're not okay, because you're perfect and you're meant to be okay. Well, that's not true. Life is not always okay. It's how we manage it and how we get through it. And I just love to do this work and helping people just discover those strengths, discover who they are, discover their, like I said, their unique purpose and what they bring to the table, and just how special you are. And it is a process. People may think, why perfectionism? But there's just so many different layers, and I love doing the layers and covering that work and just see people come alive. And even in all the midst of the shame and the guilt, it's just a beautiful thing. So that's just a bit about some of the work I do. Um, if you have any questions, just please let me know. You could just give me a call or email me, or just look more on my website if you have any more further questions. And thank you so much for your time.